Well, welcome everyone. It is my pleasure and delight to say good evening to you and welcome to our second MI Colloquium for the Spring 2022 season. This is Using Data Science Research in the Real World. So my name is Connie Pascal, and I am going to be your host tonight, as well as I'm the instructor of the MI Colloquium class. So I'm happy to see a lot of our students there. And again, just to remind you, this does become part of our video archive, which I'll allude to a little bit later, which is available on the RUCOM Info YouTube channel. So we're excited tonight because we've got a little bit different format. We've got lightning talks with industry experts and academic researchers. Sorry, I'm having trouble advancing my slide. And I'm really excited tonight to introduce our moderator for the evening, the one and only Associate Teaching Professor and Director of the MI program, Lilia Pawlowski. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lilia.
Great, thanks, Connie. Hi, everybody. If you don't know me, I am an Associate Teaching Professor and Director of the MI program, and somebody who's been around Rutgers and the School of Communication and Information for more years than I care to count. I am very excited to be here because this is a very exciting colloquium that brings together some amazing people. Connie, can you move the slide to the next one? So given the very condensed time frame that we have, our agenda is as follows. In about 3 minutes, we're going to start the lightning talks, and these will go for about 6 minutes per faculty member, with Ganesh Kasari presenting for 15 minutes because he is the voice from the field. Following the lightning talks, we will have a panel discussion which will focus on the topic of changes brought on by the pandemic. It will be moderated by Dr. Tawfiq Amari. And then after the panel discussions, we will have the Ask Me Anything portion of the event. And then the closing remarks will be like a 30-second attempt of every speaker to say their final words. Now, let's just go through a few rules here. Not really rules, but just stuff for you to know. There will be a video available of this event about a week after today. It'll be on the Colloquia playlist. Audience members will be muted during the presentation, but the chat will be live. I urge you to put your questions into the chat and include the name of the panelist to whom you are addressing your question. All right. And if you want to speak your question, we can also do that later, but we can't do it until the Q&A. So to begin, our first speaker will be Ganesh Kasari, who is the co-founder and chief decision scientist at Gramener. His topic is discovering roles and career options in data science. Next will be Tawfiq Amari. You know what? I'm not going to list all of this. The order will be Ganesh, Tawfiq, Shagun, Javer, Kiran Garamella, Michael Lesk, Vivek Singh. I will introduce them as the time, during the time that they will be presenting. This way it'll be fresh in your mind, okay? And now we shall begin. Ganesh, take it away.
All right. Hope all of you can see my screen. Thank you, Lilia.
Great, thanks.
All right. So, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining in. Excited to be kicking off this session. One of the questions I get commonly from students is career options, more so for data science, because there are just so many job titles, and it's a confusing set of skill sets, what really to get trained on and what are the job options. It's not very straightforward. For example, if you look at a typical job description on any job portal for data science, you might find something like this. This company, what are the requirements they're looking for? Data collection, data processing, feature engineering, programming skills, statistics, machine learning, deep learning, data visualization, problem solving, domain expertise, good communication, perhaps walk on water. So what they are really looking for is actually a full data science department, not just one full stack data scientist, whatever that means. So this is the typical confusion you see in the industry. Why do we see this very often? Organizations are not very sure about the mix of skills they can find in a candidate. Should they pair programming and statistical analysis, or domain skills and design skills? There are people who come with different backgrounds, and there are hundreds of courses, great courses, who train people. So there are candidates who come in with different skill sets, and organizations, they put out a very wide net in the hope that when they list 100 skills, at least they will find candidates who tick off 2 or 3 of these boxes. So the next time you see a job description, an intimidating job description like this, don't worry. And importantly, don't take it literally. So in this presentation, we'll talk about what are the roles in data science, the 5 important roles that most organizations hire for. And number 2, I'll share 3 tips to shine in a data science career. This is based on my experience over the last 12 years. I've seen thousands of candidates and common shortcomings we see in the industry. So based on these, I'll share 3 tips which will help you get a jump start when you take this path. So quickly about me, I'm co-founder and chief decision scientist at Gramna. I am on a mission to simplify data science for everyone. I speak and write, contribute to magazines like Forbes Entrepreneur. I love board games, hiking, and I'm kind of a data fanatic. I've been collecting my time log 24 hours for the last 4 years. I analyze this to build habits and gain my productivity. So with that, let's dive into the first part of the session, which is what are the roles in data science? I'll first walk through an example, a case study, a typical data science case study, a very interesting one at that. And then we'll break down this solution into the different components and see what are the roles required to build such a solution and what are the career paths available. So for this, I'll switch to an interactive version. So this is a cargo carrier. The challenge they're facing is they have SLA for turnaround time. From the time goods arrive at the airport till the time they move to the warehouse, they have a 1.5 hour SLA. And they currently they are not meeting it. They want to use data science to find out what really is causing it, number 1. And number 2, what are the potential actions they can take to fix it? So how can data science help here? This visual shows the different likely factors which could impact it. The shift, is it the morning shift, night shift, or evening shift? And you can see that the color here shows the turnaround time. 1.5 hours is green. Anything which is closer to 2 hours is red, not favorable. You can see that morning shift takes about 1.7 hours, not very great compared to the night shift, which took about 1.6 hours. So when you click on morning, Friday mornings aren't great. And any item, if I further click on Fridays and look at what happens on Friday mornings. So you click on Friday and you see that ZDH, which is like a fragile category. Any item which is fragile item shipped on Fridays take a lot of time. And any fragile item which is part shipped less than 20% takes a lot of time. So now this helps you discover all those likely paths which take time. And you can, when you set a threshold, you can find out what are those likely causes which are pulling down the SLA. Now that's first step, the diagnostic analytics. The second part is what do I do about it? Now that I know these problems, I have 5 people. If I increase this to 6 or say 7 people, what happens? There's a what if simulation model which runs in the background, recomputes all those combinations and says, when you have 7 people, this is the likely turnaround time on a Friday morning, and so on. So this is the simulation modeling, which gives you the likely answers, which helps you make decisions. The actual solution has several factors like this, like the number of forklifts and other resources available, so that the organization can optimize it. So this is an example of a solution. So now, if you were to break this into different components, there are 5 building blocks. First, you need to understand the domain. What is the business workflow? We talked about turnaround time, and we talked about the likely influencing factors. And when you talk about analytics, we did impact analytics, diagnostics, and what if modeling. And design skills are needed to understand the user journey and build the visual layer with right aesthetics. And coding skills are needed, development, where you need the front end and back end coding skills and data transformation for connecting it back to the data pipelines. And project management to get it all together and manage the change when you roll it out to users. So with these 5 building blocks, what are the different roles that you need? For each of these building blocks, for instance, domain, the role which is available, the popular role is called as a data translator. This person comes from a domain background, a business expert who has ability to perform business analysis and solutioning. The person doesn't need, or rather the person does not need to know coding, doesn't have to be a statistics expert, should have a good fluency over data and should be able to understand the other components, but doesn't have to be an expert. Data scientist, statistics, machine learning, able to interpret insights and scripting skills, but need not be a coding expert. Coding is nice to have. Some scripting skills are essential, but doesn't have to be a front-end, back-end coding expert. Design, information designer comes in with the visualization, interface design skills, aesthetics, color theory. They need to understand all of that. Development, the role is called ML engineer. Software engineering expertise with the front-end, back-end coding expertise, and ability to connect to the data pipelines. And this person, you can clearly see this distinction. A person who gets into this role doesn't have to be an expert in machine learning. This person builds the machine learning model. This person encases it into a software package. Project management is where you have data science manager coming up with project management skills, business analysis, and solutioning. Compared to a typical technology manager, this person needs to understand the probabilistic nature of analytics projects. It should be able to manage change, tackle the change management issues. So those are some critical attributes needed. So here the takeaway is there are 5 roles. If you don't want to get into a coding role, but still want to aspire a career in data science, there are paths available. So you can choose what's the, based on your background, based on the primary skill that you want to build, what is the career path you want to take. And all of these are available. And this is where the industry is moving. We talked about some immature organizations who put out like full-blown JDs, but organizations mostly are moving towards these 5 career paths. So now the second part of the presentation is about the tips, the 3 tips, which I can share quickly based on what we have seen, where professionals take time to upskill and where they face those roadblocks when they get into the industry. The first tip is to master the application of data science. So people focus a lot on techniques, for instance, statistics or say linear regression, logistic regression, decision trees, or deep learning. You need to understand which kind of problem is, say, linear or logistic regression relevant. How do you apply this to a business problem? How do you break down the business problem and apply it correctly? For example, which chart is relevant for this kind of a business insight? So that's where professionals usually struggle because they master the techniques, the technical skills, but they are not very conversant with applying it to problems. If you take this example of an organization's goal being achieving revenue growth from existing customers by addressing customer attrition, if I take this as an example goal for an organization, how do you break this down into business questions so that you understand what really you're trying to answer? So the likely business questions could be, how many customers did I lose last month? Which geography and products lost the most? This addresses the customer attrition part to understand what is really happening. And then another question could be, why did we lose 10% of customers in product A? So that's again getting into finding the next level of insight. And another question could be, how many customers am I likely to lose next month in North America? A forward-looking question, but this is again a business question a product manager will be interested in. And so on, there are several other questions to address the revenue growth, but sticking on to this example, how do you translate these business questions into data questions? The first one could be translated as compute the percentage change in customer count month over month and pivot it across the columns of geography and products. You can see the language changing and you're getting into the variables and you're translating it. So this is something which the technology team will be very comfortable to implement. So you need to make that translation. And again, once you have an insight, translate it back to the user. So this question can be answered with a descriptive kind of insight. And the second and third questions, there are examples here. So you have, you need a diagnostic insight for this one, and this one is forward-looking and a predictive insight. So this is an example of how you apply the techniques, but start with the business problem. So the guideline is understand the business problem, find out who your audience is, what are their business questions, and translate them into data questions. Find out the type of insights needed and gather all the data that you can collect and clean the data, analyze it, and qualify the insights to make sure they are actionable. And finally, present it to your audience in a language they understand and iterate on it. So this is the first step. Number two, there are several tools. People get hung up on tools, learning R or Python. What's more important is to master the techniques and the intuition behind them. And this is very closely related to applying it, but the emphasis is on techniques, not on tools. Why? The data and analytics tools landscape looks like this. There are thousands of tools, and many of these tools have already disappeared. So what's more important is the ability to learn a new tool. If you have mastered the techniques, learning a new tool for that particular technique is going to be very easy. So that's the second tip. Number three, data is dirty when you talk about real world applications. You need to develop an ability to handle and be comfortable working with different types of data. So here's an insightful but a humorous quote. 80% of time is in typical projects is spent preparing the data, and rest 20% on complaining about it. So you need to, there are several techniques to gather, clean, and curate the data. That's very important. And a lot of people assume that, and particularly professionals who come into this role first time, they assume that someone else will come in and clean the data and give a structured, nice looking data set to them. That just won't happen. You'll have to plan this, develop the skill sets, and budget time for it. So that's the third tip. So just to recap, master the application of your the data science skills to business problems, to real world problems. Number two, master the techniques, not so much, don't get hung up on the tools. And third, be prepared to clean, curate data, and be able to work with all kinds of data. So that's those are the three tips. And with this, let me hand it back. So we have a lot of other interesting talks coming up, which touch upon some of these points we talked about as well. Lilia, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ganesh. This was a great framework for all the talks that will follow. Next on the presentation docket here is Tawfiq Omari. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Library and Information Science at SCI. And his talk is titled Using Data Science to Analyze Social Change. Take it away, Tawfiq.
Thank you, Lilia. Okay, let me just try and share my screen here. Can everyone see the slides? Awesome.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about my research, specifically that I focus on big social role changes and associated technological change. So, for example, in my dissertation work, I focused on specifically on how the change in fatherhood, right, from breadwinner to more engaged parent, as you can see from this this graph, is kind of playing out online, right? So, you know, from the images of Mr. Mom, right, to what fathers actually see themselves and how they discuss themselves online. So I focused on Reddit, which, for those who don't know, is a pseudonymous social media site, meaning that you don't have to use your real, in fact, most people don't, they use a pseudonym. And it's predominantly masculine, although there are definitely spaces that are not within it, because within that site, there are some things that are called subreddits, which are basically forums, right? But it's worth noting that 23% of males between the age of 18 and 49 in the States are Reddit users. So that's why we say it's predominantly masculine. Okay, so what I wanted to know is when they're using a pseudonym, what do parents discuss, right? And what are specifically the differences between mom-centric and father-centric subreddits or forums? So the forum I focused on for dads is called Daddit, fittingly. And when they describe it, they say that it's a subreddit for dads, single dads, new dads, stepdads, tall dads, short dads. You get it. It's all for dads, right? So this is where you come talk about being a father. And so I did, something we call topic modeling, which allows you to take something that you describe as a document. In my case, I described each subreddit thread, like all the posts and the comments that are a response to them, and then associate them with particular topics. So people are talking about fill in the blanks. Right. And then that allowed me to see the concentration of different topics in different parenting sites. So if you look here, for example, there's the three forums are Daddit at the bottom, parenting right above it, and then Momit, the mom focused forum, right? And if you look at the distribution of the topics that I specifically looked at, there were about 60 topics overall. So breastfeeding is mostly discussed on the moms forum. Congratulations and welcome to the parenting club is mostly discussed on the dad forum, right? Which is dads are really into congratulating themselves about becoming fathers, right? But then the discipline is kind of discussed mostly in the forum that is not specific for moms or dads, which is the parenting forum. And while most of these look like great discussions for parents to have, I want to give a quick example about like, this is what it looks like, right? This is what, my application to join the club. This is kind of the congratulations. The response would be congratulations for joining the club. So it's mostly nice discussions and supportive discussions on this forum. But they can also be discussions like about having a child in the NICU or child custody issues. And when you look at child custody and divorce, you find that there's this thing called a throwaway account. And on Reddit, a throwaway account is what is known as an anonymous account. It's kind of like that is what you use when you want to talk about something in a temporary fashion, and that where you want to talk about something that you don't want to share with your main account because it's sensitive in some way. So one of the things that I wanted to know is when parents use these anonymous accounts, what do they talk about, right? What are the predictors? How can I predict whether or not a parent is going to use an anonymous account? So what I did was I used the classifier to predict whether a user is a throwaway user or not. So the pseudonymous user is someone who's just using a pseudonym. A throwaway user is anonymous. And in order to predict that, I used the LDA topics that I discussed before, but then I added to them sentiment analysis, something like positive sentiment, negative sentiment, plus some control features. So something like how many responses did you get? What are the length of these responses? How many upvotes versus downvotes did you get? That sort of thing. And then we found that, when people talk about abuse and therapy, parenting hardships, financial planning, family health, speech and social development for the child, all these things go into the anonymous posts. So, in addition to that, I used other methods, in this case, something called propensity score matching, to look at the differences between these two, like anonymous accounts and non-anonymous accounts, to find out what the main differences between them.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. What the main differences between them are. And the cool thing about this is that when someone uses an anonymous account, they get a higher chance of getting a reply, more replies that have higher scores. So people are supporting them. So they also get social support. And the comment length itself is longer. So what's cool about this is that after publishing our paper, I'm not saying there's a direct relationship, Facebook started allowing people to post anonymously in the Facebook groups, right? Specifically starting with parenting Facebook groups, which allowed people to start maybe post with their username, with their own real names, but then switch to anonymous accounts. So that's nice because you can see how your work can actually apply to the real world. Finally, COVID changed the world a lot. So here's another way in which we can look at the world and try to kind of understand how people's needs change. Specifically, in this case, we're looking at foster parents.
Oh, we're at time, Tawfiq.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Right. I'm done.
Great job condensing that brilliance into a tasty nugget. So thank you.
Thank you, Tawfiq. That is so hard to do.
It is. And I really wanted to hear the rest of it too.
We'll all practice because we we do these little pecha kucha things every once in a while, and they can be a lot of fun, but really hard to do. Next on the list is Dr. Shagun Javert, who will speak to you on the topic of creating social computing systems to collect and analyze social data.
Great. Thanks, Lilia. You all can hear me, right? Okay. So I'm going to discuss social computing systems that we can create by using data science methods. And this is an example of how you can use data science to create visualizations and systems that are used on an ongoing basis and that can affect in positive ways the work of people across the world. So in this particular case, I'm going to give you a demo for FilterBuddy, which is a system that we have created to improve creator-led comment moderation on YouTube. And I'm going to describe what I mean by that. But before I begin, I want to caution that some of the slides in this demo contain offensive language. So this research is focused on serving content creators on platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and Twitch. Creators on these platforms not only have to write, produce, and edit their content, they are also responsible for removing inappropriate comments posted on their channels. Creators, especially those belonging to marginalized groups, often experience stalking, harassment, and online threats, and feel a greater need to engage in comment moderation. However, as their channels grow, it becomes difficult for creators to review all the comments by themselves, and some automation becomes necessary. And as a result, creators have long requested YouTube and other social media sites for more powerful moderation tools. As content creators, one of the most commonly available tools to automate moderation is called word filters. These are the tools in which users can configure a list of phrases, and comments containing any of those phrases are automatically removed. While these word filters are available on many platforms, they usually present very rudimentary features. And the goal of FilterBuddy, a system that we created, was to augment word filter tools with features to support better authoring, maintenance, and auditing of word filters. So this is a screenshot of FilterBuddy, the website that we created for YouTube creators. And instead of that single box that you saw before, where you had to feed all the words that you wanted to block on your channel, FilterBuddy allows user to separately group different categories of inappropriate comments. This allows for a better organization of word filters and an easier review and search. FilterBuddy offers a few curated categories by default. So one thing which we noted was that people had a hard time coming up with the words that they wanted to get blocked. So what we did here was users don't need to create commonly needed categories like sexism and racism from scratch. We created filters for these categories ourselves based on prior literature. And here we are seeing how a user imports the built-in homophobia category. And on importing, users are redirected to a new homophobia category page that is already populated with many carefully curated homophobic keywords. And once a user has that, users can subsequently edit this category to match their preferences. FilterBuddy also allows users to see examples of matching comments while configuring filters. So when users enter a phrase in the Add New Phrase box here, it automatically populates all the comments previously posted on the user's channel that contains this phrase. Reviewing these comments allows users to make an informed decision on whether they want to add this phrase as a word filter. Users can choose whether they want the system to catch the spelling variants of each word filter, and they can decide what actions they want to take on comments caught by each word filter. Finally, FilterBuddy allows users to get an overview of word filters actions. On each category page, we present a graph that tells users how different phrases configured in that category catch comments on their channel over the last 30 days. We also show the users a preview table of all the comments scored by that category. Additionally, on the overview page, we show the users a graph of comments scored by each category over the last 30 days. So that's the demo that I wanted to show. And the thing I wanted to emphasize here was that this was a system which was focused on a particular user need. Users were overwhelmed by receiving a lot of comments that contained offensive keywords. And then we created this system for creators that they could use on an ongoing basis. And this required 3 different stages. First, the needs analysis, where we talked to users and understood their needs. And then we went about designing the system using data science methods. And the methods that we have used here are not very fancy. They are not very sophisticated. We just use the most
60 seconds.
Commonly available tools to allow us to create systems. But the focus there was to allow us to create tools that we knew from our needs analysis users really needed. And then we also evaluated the system with real creators to understand whether the system is performing well or not. So this is an application of how you can use data science to make a difference. Thank you.
Wow, I'm impressed. That was great.
Yeah, totally. Right there on the 6-minute mark. Thank you, Shagun. Dr. Kiran Garamella will talk to you on the topic of tackling large-scale social problems with data science.
Great. Yeah, thanks a lot. So yeah, I mean, great presentations by 2 of my colleagues. So I'll continue that. And so my presentation is going to be more broad. So I'll briefly talk about, some examples of social societal problems that we tackle in some of my research. Some of these have really practical applications. And, continuing that theme, like, Shagun and Tawfiq have been using different types of social media data. My work also uses a lot of different types of social media data. And these societal problems, or the social problems that I'm going to talk about, here's a few examples. And like, so some of these are really, important current problems that we are facing in our times. And some of these are specific to, social media. So, yeah, there's going to be some nice, interesting applications of applying data science techniques to understand these issues on social media, but also develop solutions for tackling some of these issues, right? Like, so the first problem that I'm going to talk about is political polarization in the US. So, we've all seen like how politics has become a lot polarized in the US. So, this is a survey that was done by an organization called the Pew Research Center 20 years apart. So in 1994 and in 2014. And they asked people like, how their opinions about a lot of political issues, the same questions in 1994 and 2014. And what they realized is the median Democrat and Republican have actually moved further apart, meaning the intersection of views, so people having similarity of views across 2 different political parties is no longer, I mean, it's much farther than it was 20 years ago. I mean, I'm sure this has become even worse in the last 8 years or so. And, this is a growing concern, like, political polarization has a lot of issues, right? Like, and we are seeing the consequences of these, right? Like, so seemingly non-political issues like COVID, for instance, or masking and things like that have also become politicized, and so that's a problem. So in this work, what we did is we tried to model political polarization as observed on social media. So to do that, what we did is we got a lot of Twitter data for a lot of different types of topics, and we constructed these networks of how people interact with each other. So here, this is a beautiful plot, but what it shows is each dot here is a Twitter user, and there's a connection between 2 dots if one user retweeted the other, right? Like, and if you gather like a few tens of thousands of tweets, you get a plot like this. What this shows is that there are 2 clusters. So there's a red cluster and a blue cluster. And the blue cluster retweets a lot among themselves. So there are connections, a lot of them between the blue group. And the red cluster does the same. So there are lots of connections between the red cluster. But there's very few connections across, meaning, these are, I mean, this is a discussion on gun control in the US. And what is being shown here is that the blue side is just talking to the blue side, the red side is just talking to the red side, right? There are no connections across. So this is a clear example of how a polarized discussion looks on Twitter. And using data science tools, we were able to map this out. And further, like we then once we found this, we try to develop solutions for trying to connect people with something outside of their bubble, right? And so this is by developing recommender systems, for instance, that can help people get exposed to information that they wouldn't normally see in their, when they're enclosed within their own bubbles. So this is one example. Another is an example of misinformation. Again, a huge problem, very timely. We are seeing the consequences of what misinformation could do, both in political but also non-political circles. And there are also claims that misinformation and the prevalence of social media and the ability to amplify specific types of misinformation or conspiracy or rumors is actually a threat to democracy, right? Like, so in this work, what we did is we studied misinformation on one specific platform, which is WhatsApp, which is a very popular app used by billions of people. And again, like, misinformation has real world consequences. So for instance, there's a lot of COVID misinformation that's spreading on WhatsApp. And unlike other social media platforms that we use, like Facebook or Twitter or Reddit, because WhatsApp is encrypted, you cannot see any content on there. So there's no way of moderating any content on a platform like WhatsApp. So, and it has, again, like, real world consequences. Like, people have been killed in countries like India, like elections have been manipulated using WhatsApp in countries like Brazil and so on. And in this work, what we've done is we have tried to, again, understand this issue, collect a lot of data, use data-driven methods to understand the issue, and then develop solutions for tackling misinformation. And the solutions could be, in two different types, right? Like, one is developing efficient methods for fact-checking content, like, identifying if something is fake or not, is misinformation or not, using on automated techniques, but also in helping users themselves realize what is real and what is not, right? So improving digital literacy. And then the final problem, like societal problem that I want to talk about
60 seconds.
is about migration and assimilation using social media data. So all of us use social media. So social media usage leaves a digital trail, and this can be used to identify patterns of migration and assimilation. So for instance, I'm from India. So if I tweeted from India on Twitter, and then a few years later, I'm tweeting from the US, you can identify that, I've moved from India to the US, right? Like, and now if you think about population level scale, right? Like, so hundreds of millions of people, you really can get lots of signals about the movement of people and migration and assimilation patterns from such data. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Kiran.
You've got 3 seconds to spare. That was amazing.
Look at the efficiency of these guys. That's
right.
why they're in data science. Yeah, it's so interesting to see all these points of view side by side.
It really is.
Like seconds apart. Moving on to Professor Michael Lesk, who will speak to us on the topic of understanding how data curation is important in organizational and political issues.
So I was going to talk about the fact that you have to understand your data and how it's been collected. For example, we just 15 minutes ago heard about filtering nasty messages on words. 2 years ago, I was working with a friend of mine, Sid Dalal, on trying to measure bias in the New York Times versus Reuters. And so we had the standard dictionaries of good and bad words to see whether stories about some politicians were written with more positive words than others. And one of the problems was the word vice is on the list as a nasty word, right? Yeah, vice is bad stuff, except that if what you've got is the New York Times, the most common instance of vice is in the phrase vice president, and it's not bad at all. So, all right, you have to look for things like that and pick them out. And then you have the problem that sometimes people do that deliberately. COVID statistics that you see are being very carefully gamed. Florida, for example, makes a point of if somebody dies in Florida of a COVID infection that they got in Florida, but they're only a winter resident, their domicile, as lawyers would say, is in a different state, then Florida won't report that. Missouri has simply stopped reporting COVID statistics entirely. So, by the way, has India. It's holding up the entire international report. And then you might want to look in more detail. I wanted to know whether Florida had more deaths as a fraction of population than California. So I did the trivial calculation, and it looks like if Florida had California's statistics, 20,000 people that have died would not have died. I sent that to somebody who didn't like that answer and said, what about the age-adjusted death rates? Because people in Florida are older than in other states, which is true except for Maine, of all things. And the answer is, yeah, that makes it better. It still doesn't entirely remove the discrepancy, but it takes away about 3/4 of it. And then people who look at these numbers try to ask, what about the weather? If you believe that outdoors is basically safe, okay, do people in Florida spend more or less time outdoors than people in New Jersey? Well, that depends on what month it is. There are months when people in Florida like to run around outside, but New Jersey is too cold, and other months when people in Florida are staying in the air conditioning and New Jersey is comfortable. And there I have not been able to see weather-adjusted death rates. So I don't know whether people in Florida are getting more COVID in the summer because they're inside more, or because that's how the waves of the disease have gone. It is true that New York and New Jersey have had more cases in the winter. The South has had more cases in the summer, but we don't really know enough yet to say. And then another example, I was doing a project to try to answer the question, when the New York Times publishes a positive article, good news about somebody, versus a negative article, does that mean that the photo editor will select good pictures or bad pictures? And I first said, oh, this is going to be easy. If the news story is good, the people in it will be smiling. If the news story is bad, people in it won't be smiling. So this project failed. Problem number one, not all stories, in fact, few stories can neatly be described as this is all good news, this is all bad news. New York Times writes a story about Bolsonaro in Brazil. The first illustration shows a cheering crowd.
60 seconds, Michael.
Yes. 3 illustrations later, there are people burying somebody. And that was the way the article was written. And then the big data science problem was the pictures we were training on included a lot of children. The New York Times doesn't publish pictures of children. So we were learning on an inappropriate data set, and we got the wrong answers. More precisely, we didn't get any answers. So what I'm saying is, if you try to make decisions like should we have mask wearing based on statistics, there's a lot you have to do to try to get the statistics correct. Thanks.
Perfect. Great.
Thank you, Michael. Last but definitely not least is Dr. Vivek Singh, who will talk on the topic of using phone and sensor data to understand, influence, and predict human behavior.
Thank you, Lilia. Thank you, everyone. So that's quite a wide topic, but basically what I'm trying to build a case for is that we have the biggest opportunity to know about ourselves as we've ever had in the history of mankind. All these wearable devices, all the phones, all our electronic logs, everything being digitized has lots of goods and bads, and one of the goods is that we can understand our own selves. We can understand when there are signs for early onset of dementia. We can understand how things are changing in our heart rate, how our gaze is moving around. These are the kind of things we've never had as human society ever. I really, even if I want to, there's no way I can know what my grandfather was listening to when he was 20 years old. But our grandkids, our hypothetical grandkids, would have that opportunity. As a culture, as a society, we have that opportunity to really know ourselves, understand when is doing something good, when is something not good, what are the early indicators of any of these health-related things, and so on that I mentioned. I've been part of multiple studies. Some of this started during my postdoc many years ago at MIT Media Lab. Since then at Rutgers, one wave was in 2015. We led this thing called Rutgers Wellbeing Study. Last year, we led another round of study. It was called the Rutgers Wellness Study. The common theme is we are using digital traces. It could be coming from Google Logs. It could be coming from phones, could be coming from Fitbits, your browsing history. But we want to see early trends. We want to see early patterns related to your wellness. We've tried to see what patterns are indicative of you being happy or sad, you being in good mental health, you having enough social support, enough trusted ties. These are the kind of questions we've studied in the social sciences often and are related to health and well-being, but we haven't been able to study it with the kind of granularity of data. Every person will in the study, every person, every hour of the day, and you could do these longitudinally for years. That kind of an opportunity is really unparalleled, and data science comes in as a tool that allows us to understand these things. So we've written multiple papers, and some of them were trying to do the predictions. Some we were trying to show the same data, versions of this data visualizations. Hey, or you would have seen that on your Fitbit and so on. You walked 20% less this week than last week. You haven't taken any stairs today. Your friend is walking faster, is running more miles. All of these are ways to persuade people. So it's our data which is enabling very human processes. So to me, technology, data, they are merely the middleware. They are the tools to really enable human to human interconnection. The persuasion actually is my mom walking and showing me, hey, I walked 12,000 steps yesterday. What did you do? So the persuader is my mom. That's not the phone, but phone is enabling that. And those are the kind of opportunities that I'm really excited about. The second thing, I mean, all of us are doing this in the sky context. The aspect which I was following along in the discussion, the mixed methods approach, bringing some of the critical analysis, bringing some of the principles from the social sciences, and then being able to understand the machine learning tools, the data science tools inside out, is where I think there is a lot of value and very little competition. That's a very, very unique skill, and the kind of graduates we aim to produce out of our MI program. Those are the people who understand the human values. They understand the social science grounding, but they also know what a machine learning algorithm means. What does it mean to clean the data? These are not rows. These are people that you are dealing with. So building that kind of an intuition, building that kind of an insight is extremely important. And that's what I would encourage anybody listening in. So we've tried to build algorithms for, early onset of dementia or mental health prediction. But we also have tried to think, what are the privacy implications of this? Are these algorithms actually fair for different sections of the society? What could go wrong? And again, I mean, we have to weigh the pros and cons. You may choose to go one way or the other. but that ability to think through, to rationalize this, that I think is really something very, very important. And I'm hoping that our graduates would be the people who will bring that kind of a thinking out in the real world. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek. This really wraps up the whole ethical side of the discussions in data science. And you're right, this is something very important and unique that our school and the researchers within our school bring to that table. I also wanted to mention, and I didn't do it before, that Vivek is the director of the Behavioral Informatics Lab. And now we're going to move on to our next session, and we are early. Is it even possible? We're early.
Right on time. Oh my gosh.
Oh, this is amazing, guys. Really wonderful. All right. So this is a panel discussion that Tawfiq will moderate. It will focus on the topic of changes brought on by the pandemic and how data science research I have works written in here, but how data science research fits into the process and the context.
Thank you, Lilia.
Sorry, I can't speak today.
So I think, the COVID has changed a lot about what we do in our daily lives, and it definitely changed the way that we do our research and what we focus on. I've definitely had, I do have projects now focusing on COVID myself, and we all think about, like, we've all, I think, become amateur epidemiologists over the course of the past couple of years, trying to figure out what the risk is for doing anything, right? And so I think the data science itself, the field has changed quite a bit. And I'd like to start with Ganesh and talk about how, like, what are the changes that have taken place in the professional scene? What are people looking for, and how have these roles changed, if at all, over the past 2 years?
Yeah. Over the last 2 years, it's been 2 years already, we've seen tremendous changes. Two patterns I would like to call out. We are seeing very clearly in organizations. One, clients who were already using data and analytics, with customers, employees, everyone going remote, they started diving in deeper into analytics. They increased the budget. While there were cuts in other areas, the budget for analytics, we've seen this going up year over year the last 2 years. For example, there was this logistics player which operates cold chain warehouses. They wanted to find out what is likely to be the demand and supply, availability of employees, and what is likely to be the customer bookings for the next couple of weeks. So that's a case of better visibility in the wake of the pandemic. That was an analytics clear data science use case. And a second pattern we saw also was organizations that were not data savvy, that had not invested in data. They were shocked with the sudden movement of everything going remote. And we started getting requests for digital transformation or helping with setting the data foundation. This again, we have seen across like many of the other companies as well. So two clear patterns: those who are using data started advancing and investing more, and others, they started accelerating their movement towards analytics.
I want to then move a little bit to talk about go back to what Michael had, some of the things that Michael had raised, specifically in relation to literacy around statistics and numbers, and how people can understand the trove of data that is out there. So if you can kind of expand a little bit on some of the patterns that you see around COVID statistics that are being shared. How can we, for example, as folks who are in the field, try to better explain data out there, or give people better tools to understand it?
I think one of the most interesting examples is the British nationwide study of treatments. The United States started investigating treatments by having huge numbers of doctors individually giving different patients different drugs. In particular, because of the public fuss about hydroxychloroquine, there were dozens of underpowered studies about hydroxychloroquine, and other drugs weren't being evaluated at all. In the UK, they basically said every COVID patient is enrolled in a study, and we will keep data on them and try to overall run a nationwide study of the effectiveness of the different treatments. And in fact, if you look around, you'll find that an awful lot of what we know about COVID is coming from the UK because it has relatively good data. And one of the problems is that Boris Johnson just did away with that. So nobody knows what the next source of data is going to be.
Great, thanks, Michael. Relating to that, so I want to move to Curation and kind of extend the idea that relates to the striking network that you showed, right? The polarization. I think the same polarization applies to a lot around COVID. So two things that I'd like you to kind of expand on is, how do you think fact checking and engagement with folks online can try to resolve that? And have you seen anything relating to COVID that is similar to the graph that you showed?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, COVID is like a really perfect example, use case of like the downstream effects of political polarization, right? Like, I mean, you have political polarization, but then they creep into all these lifestyle issues. Like, do you want to wear a mask? Do you want to get a vaccine? So these are a consequence of some of those like polarization that has been growing, and it's still increasing over the years. So for sure, like, I mean, almost every topic related to COVID is polarized. I mean, and it need not just be polarized along like this political axis. In a lot of instances, it did happen because of the way the government reacted to certain cases and things like that. But it could also be pro science versus anti science, or pro authority versus anti-authority, right? Like, so I don't want to listen to Fauci, or I don't want to listen to what the CDC says, or similarly, like, there's kids versus like parents versus non-parents. Like, so there's I mean, polarization definitely has manifested in a variety of ways during the pandemic, and unfortunately, I mean, there's no clear solution for this type of an issue. Like, especially, I mean, if you're thinking about like fact checking or things like that as a source of like informing people, again, like with this like increase in polarization, people having like anchoring themselves in their beliefs or beliefs of like influential people in their circle has been a big problem. So if you don't like authority, right? If you don't like CDC, anything that the CDC says is not something that I'm going to follow. So that has been a huge issue. Trust in like mainstream media and things like that has also been an issue. Yeah.
Cool. And luckily, we have Shagun, who is an expert on how communities are moderated, specifically looking at moderation tools and actual moderators, and how they try to balance and manage what Curation had just described. So I'm going to move this to Shagun and ask him about what he's seeing online, not necessarily specifically related to current COVID patterns, but COVID in general, and how moderation can be affected and effective going forward.
Yeah, so one of the things that I have observed is that with the rise of COVID, there has also been a simultaneous rise in some of the other types of problems, online challenges that we see in terms, I'm thinking especially for anti-Asian hate, which was a huge problem and continues to remain a big problem, and how certain communities and users and creators face a disproportionate amount of hate, which has just even more increased even further after the COVID pandemic. So yeah, but at the same time, the platforms often have not really stepped up and provided sufficient tools and mechanisms. A lot of the content moderation that happens online happens through volunteer moderators that can benefit a lot from data science applications. And there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Cool. I personally do study some, not only focus on social media, I study emerging technologies. So things like voice assistants, Amazon, Alexa, Google Home, and other technologies and how people use them, specifically focusing on how it affects their daily routines. So I want to ask Vivek about what kind of two things. What kind of ways do you think the introduction of more of these technologies can be helpful in allowing people to monitor COVID or long COVID, right, as we now try to grapple with that, and the privacy issues that arise with that and how we can manage them?
I mean, very good question. I don't know if I'll have the answer to either of the two, but I wanted to mention this is a research project. No, I'm not involved, but somebody I've collaborated with in the past, Erez Shmueli, is at Tel Aviv University. What they did recently for COVID was they gave like a chest patch to 160 people while they were getting Pfizer vaccines. And for some time following the vaccination, right? In the US, we are supposed to self-report any adverse reactions. And well, it had to be adverse and you had to self-report and all that. In their case, they were tracking 16 biomarkers, things like heart rate and blood pressure and a bunch of other related things in a passive, unobtrusive manner. And I think that's at least one interesting direction, one interesting opportunity to consider. Like every time we do get flu shots every year, who knows, we will be getting COVID shots every year going forward. But instead of like trying to collect data in a self-reported ad hoc, all the other cost and so on issues, maybe there are some opportunities that these kinds of devices or phones might already be tracking some of these kinds of things, and we would know really at scale what's going on, what are the ratios of adverse reactions or changes in heart or blood pressure and things like that. So to me, those are excellent opportunities. Every time I say opportunity, I have to remember with great powers come great responsibilities. And that's exactly the major issue anytime you're studying human behavior. So I don't really have an answer. People are trying different things. So first of all, informed consent. It's a big deal. I mean, when Facebook tries to do something, they kind of hide it away and will be used for business purposes and business and research purposes. Nobody really knows when and what and how. We need to do better than that. These kinds of EULAs need to be translated into human language and be more accessible. Also, again, we need to figure out ways to build machine learning algorithms that don't really work on all the data for all the people. So people are trying, right? There's federated learning, people are trying differential privacy. So you kind of keep trends, but you don't keep individual data. People are also trying that you learn the trends and then start removing individual data after it. So certain general properties remain, the details are lost. I mean, so on, right? So there are multiple people who are trying to do things like that. I, again, wish I knew the answer to it, but yes, at least it should be an important consideration in making your next decision.
People have very different attitudes towards some of the monitoring. Around 2010, I was visiting Google and they had a health project and they were very big on the idea of people wearing monitors. And what went wrong was the discovery that the 20-year-olds thought this was just great, but 20-year-olds don't get sick very often. It doesn't really matter whether you're monitoring them. The 70-year-old who would have benefited didn't like these devices, and typically they wound up in a drawer after some number of weeks. And people went and asked them and got answers like, well, I don't wear it because it's the wrong color, doesn't match my blouse. So they gave up. Now we're doing it again with less intrusive stuff. I talked to somebody in Missouri who worked in an elder care facility, and they had cameras in the corridors to spot people who were not walking straight. Because if you can catch people before they fall and send them to physical therapy, it's a big help. So they were into these non-obtrusive observation systems.
Also, again, like the beauty of a place like Sky is that we do have people who are interested in data science, but are also interested in UXR and can often bridge those kinds of disciplines. So like asking people, would you wear this? What would help you wear this? What kind of visualizations would be helpful for you to keep track of your own activities? What is helpful for you and your family to interact with each other in terms of step counts? By the way, that was a real example. So those kinds of things are just as important as some of the other things that we do hear about or know about in the data science field. So I think there are lots of exciting opportunities at that intersection.
Awesome. I think there's a lot more that we can delve into in this, but we're almost out of time, I think. And Connie, should we move to the next?
We should. Actually, we're going to move now into our Ask Me Anything, which is not Ask Me Anything, but the audience is going to ask you guys anything. So we also have a couple other questions in the chat as well. Lilia, do you want to run through the questions, or do you want to do the Ask Me Anything?
So once I got kicked off of Zoom, I can't get into the previous questions. So if there's any questions that you can read.
I do have a couple of questions. Actually, Angela asked earlier, I believe when Tawfiq was speaking, what gender group tends to use throwaway accounts more as opposed to the anonymous accounts? I don't know, that might have got answered in chat.
So I'll just go over it quickly. The only way we could identify that is by saying that someone posts more or started posting to, say, the mother-centric forum versus the father-centric forum. There's no way to actually identify people because that's the point of using Reddit, right? There's no information about your gender, where you are, et cetera, et cetera. But we could guess. And it turns out that it doesn't really matter, the gender. What we could kind of identify is there are different issues that are described by people who are anonymous but come from a specific subreddit. So if you're from the father-centric one, you're more probable, if you're anonymous, to discuss something like divorce and custody. If you're from the mom-centric one, you're more probable to discuss a child with special needs, right? So that's general. There are breakdowns like that.
Josh, you had a question. Do you want to take yourself off mute and put yourself on camera and ask your question?
I think I'm off mute and on camera. I don't know if you're seeing me on the spotlight or not. But yeah, my question was in terms of content silos and whether recommendation systems are going to become too one-dimensional if we start allowing users to focus too highly on kind of one key domain of information. You know, if we're looking at Democratic and Republican content, if someone is getting too personalized a feed on their given information system, is that a problem? And what responsibility do we as data science researchers have on making algorithms that are, you know, open to sharing those new ideas?
Josh, who do you want who's that targeted to?
I think Quran might potentially, since it's given the political.
Great question.
Yeah, really good question. I mean, again, like this is I mean, it could get philosophical, and yeah, there's no clear answer to this, but yeah, I mean, this is something. I mean, there. Let's say, just very simplify this issue, right? There are two components that go into users choosing these silos or users being present in these silos, right? One is personal choices, right? Like I mainly, my network is only Republican. And the other is the algorithm, right? Like where, okay, because you're following only Republicans, the algorithm thinks that you are interested in that content, you'll engage more, you're likely to engage more with that content. And then there's this cycle where, it just keeps going and you really get into those cycles, right? Like, so, and there the algorithms are responsible to a certain extent because, okay, even though the users made some choice, they don't have a global view of like what else is on the platform. And so in that sense, developing these recommender systems that are aware of this problem, that don't just optimize for whatever view time or your engagement on the platform, but also kind of do this sort of serendipitous insertion of content that might give you a different viewpoint, is probably not a bad thing to do. Again, like this is not a binary where, okay, you should say an algorithm should do this. There are lots of gray areas here, which again, might take a long time to think about.
Awesome, thanks.
I think it would be best if others would ask questions rather than write them in chat. It's easier, I think, for the panelists to respond.
I agree. So we're into again, ask me anything. Does anyone have any questions, for example, about job hunting or how to apply what you're learning in school to the role in the data world? We'll see if we can get somebody from the audience to ask a question.
And you don't have to use video. You can just.
Yeah, you can just take yourself off mute and ask.
Everything's been answered.
Hi.
When someone asks a question, I just wanted to add one point to what Kiran mentioned earlier. I think that's a great point on recommendation engines. An example there is Spotify. So it injects new recommendations beyond the user's stated preferences. I love the Discover Weekly, wherein it shares new songs beyond your regular taste. But I end up rediscovering songs I've heard maybe 10, 20 years back. So that's an example of how some very good recommendation engines don't feed into the social bubble, but they introduce the serendipity, like Kiran explained.
So how did it know what you liked 20 years ago?
Perhaps it doesn't know. The point is it doesn't know. It is suggesting new songs I've not listened to. So that's a point of Discover Weekly. I've never listened to it, at least on the platform. But some are similar to your preferences. Some are very different from what you've been listening to. I don't know how the algorithm works, but it usually comes up with these songs I've heard long ago.
Interesting.
We definitely need that.
You had a question.
Did you just ask Angela?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry, you just you talked about like what we are interested in working in, and so I'm in the archives and preservation concentration, but I am kind of looking more into going into like local government work. My husband works as a legislative analyst for the Association of Washington Cities here in Washington State. So he's doing a lot of analysis of the legislation that's passed. Specifically, he's done a lot with COVID and how it relates to the cities here in Washington. And they've got a new law here with regards to police reform that they're now going to have to go through and study all of the old convictions and cases and stuff in Washington State. And I find that really interesting going into sort of government data science work. But I'm wondering, I don't know what sort of experience there is with working in government, and you kind of get pigeonholed into how I don't know, I guess there's sort of a worry for me about like how does data science and how do data scientists feel working in government, and not kind of feeling pushed towards like specific conclusions, if that makes sense, kind of along the lines of the polarization.
Angela, who would you like that directed to?
I don't know.
Ganesh, do you want to take a shot?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's I'm not familiar with. I think the perspective you're looking at as people who get into government and work in a data science role Is there like what are the options, and do they get pigeonholed? I'm not very familiar with the government setting here. We've worked with other governments in a couple of other countries, but not here. So may not be able to specifically answer that, but generally talking about the data science field and the options, I think that's the case even when you look at large organizations. A common complaint is people get into a particular role in data science. For instance, let us say they built models and in a particular domain for one particular business process flow. They tend to do that for a number of years. And they don't get to work on different kinds of problems. So that's a challenge even in enterprises. But when people are conscious about building that the diverse experience and wanting to work on different industries or different process flows within the same industry, the options are available, and the shortage of talent and the emerging roles probably makes it easier to switch. As long as people are familiar with the different roles and requirements, it will be easier to make that switch, talk to the employer and make that switch. So I would say in a field like data science, which is still evolving, that possibilities exist. Perhaps that might be true in government setting as well.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in? I just want to say, like, when you talk about, I'm not going to refer, I haven't worked in data science and government either, but I think it's worth noting that some of the, Angela, is it, you just said that you're an archivist by training, right? So one of the main things that you can do with your training is use it as a data scientist, right? So categorization is really important as you set up any data science, like any model that you want to set up. So how you categorize things, thinking about categorizations in a more systematic way, that's actually great, like kind of a really good skills that can be used in creating, like setting up the data to begin with. And I kind of want to twist that to ask Ganesh about some of the, so what are these skills that are like that? Like Vivek just talked about UXR, right? Design, skills that are kind of adjacent to data science, not necessarily exactly data science, and how those can be really useful for a data scientist coming in.
Yeah, like social science or the humanities and arts discipline, that's an interesting intersection emerging. That's where I think Vivek's point was great, where typically data scientists, people who come from a technology background, do not think or do not understand enough about consumer behavior. Whereas someone who comes from a social science, someone who's practicing, who's a practicing psychologist, for instance, I've had some people reach out from social science backgrounds and say they've said they have an interest in data analytics and what are the career options. Organizations like the large, the big four, like Google, Facebook, they have been using behavioral researchers to game and make sure people click on those buttons and spend more time within the applications. Unfortunately, you don't see that kind of a wider need in most other organizations. They're not hiring people with this kind of a mix in larger numbers. It's still heavily technology centric. But someone who comes from those, the arts and humanities background, bring in a very valuable perspective. And I consider this as one of the emerging roles over the next 5 to 10 years. People who come in from there and can build up their data analytics skills, they will be in demand. They will be able to solve a lot of problems and bring in a new perspective to it.
Something that is coming up is an increased need for generating explanations of algorithms. In New York, for example, the law says that if a bank turns someone down for a loan, they have to tell them why. They can't just say, well, the algorithm didn't think you would pay it back. This is, I think, going to become very common. In medicine, for example, it turns out that doctors really don't like it when some program says, here's the diagnosis of this patient, and we can't tell you why. So there's getting to be a lot of interest in people who can generate an explanation of why this data implies that result.
Agreed. Yeah, true.
Does anyone else want to ask a question or even type it into chat?
Well, actually, Arcadio and I were back chatting a little bit about roles and kind of what Ganesh said about, when you look at a job description, how do you know what roles or what skills or things are fungible to the employee, an employer, sorry, so if I don't have all the skills, but I'm interested in the company, how do I know if I should actually apply or if I have a shot? Any advice for our budding information scientists, data scientists?
Yeah, it's difficult to tell, but a strong recommendation, again, from personal experience of hiring people at Graham I would strongly suggest, if a job description is interesting to you, even if you don't have all the skills, apply. Because in data science, they're not looking for a perfect match, not even a close match. Even if you have a few skills and if you're strong in those areas, the companies are willing to consider, because they have one, growing needs, and number two, there is good fungibility, at least within an organization, because they are hiring for different roles and still formalizing the career paths. So if it's interesting, apply. It's very difficult to tell just by looking at the JD.
I would add to that it's not just data science. Jobs that have this problem of a laundry list or a wish list of skills that employers are looking for, I think it's almost in every area within our information professional domain that does this.
Mm-hmm.
I will add one thing that we also know about is this is a kind of difference in male versus female behavior when looking at job recommendation or requirements. Statistically speaking, women will look at the job requirement and say, I don't have all of those requirements, or I only have 60% or 70% of what they're looking for, so I don't qualify. Well, men will look at that and say, oh, I have 70% of the job requirements, I'm going to apply. So to the women in the audience, just do apply. You don't have to have all of the everything, as everyone has said. So I think it's probably, Lilia, time to go to our closing remarks. We've only got about 6 minutes left. We are doing so well on time. And I want to give everybody a chance to kind of wrap things up. It's been really good. So
I think it's a good time to let's go backwards. And you'll each have 30 seconds or so to, formulate, your final words, and then we'll call it a night. So we'll start with, who will we start with? We'll start with Vivek.
You can do it. Don't be worried. Take the first step. That's always the most important step.
sure,
Thank you. Michael.
This is a great area because we make a lot of progress, and the problems that were hard for you when you start learning are going to be things that some years down the road will be easy and you can see them solved.
Absolutely. Curation.
Yeah, so I wanted to stress the importance of domain expertise that came up in in all these chats. And for instance, me, Taufik, Shagun, Vivek, we consider ourselves to be in this budding field called computational social science, which is just this intersection of computer science or data-driven techniques with the social sciences, various types. And so a lot of the people in the audience might really fit well into that sort of a discipline. And I think applied data science in these different types of disciplines is really good future area. Yeah.
Excellent. Shagun.
Yeah, I was very pleased to hear the diversity of skills and experiences that Ganesh mentioned in his briefing at the start. And I would want to emphasize that there's a lot of skills that can go into creating a data science system or a pipeline. And you don't have to learn everything, but see what interests you and focus on that.
Thank you. Taufik.
As someone who teaches the Introduction to Machine Learning class in the master's course, I do want to stress exactly what Curation and Vivek and Shagun, everyone said. you have something to bring into the data science field, use your background, pick up some more skills, and believe in yourself, right? And you'll get there. But that's something I really do want to stress with students coming in. Yes, I want them to learn more skills, but also bring in your skill set, bring in your background in psychology, in archives, in whatever it is you come with. That's always very important and useful.
Thank you. Last but not least, Ganesh.
Yeah. I would like to emphasize that every problem that we see around us today can be solved with data and analytics. We just have to be creative and we'll be able to come up with an approach. And second, identifying data. A lot of people look for the known sources, familiar sources, but there's a lot of dark data, as people call it, where you are not aware of it, but it exists. So you can infer and collect a lot of data. So get creative with the problems you're trying to solve, and look for data in unusual places, and you can come up with magical solutions.
Thank you.
Well,
I also
just like
think
to add one thing as a closing remark too, which is there is a difference between data and information, and you can have all the data in the world. And if you can't turn that into information, which by definition has to be timely, accurate, and complete, then your data is worthless. So that's what we do as information scientists. So we turn that data into information. And from information, of course, comes knowledge and hopefully eventually wisdom. So this has been great. And I will turn it over to Lilia to wrap us up. And I think we also wanted to hear from Marie, right?
yes, Marie, can you, Dr. Radford, Professor Marie Radford is here in the audience. She's the department chair of Library and Information Science. And if you have a few words to say, Marie, please unmute yourself and come on board.
Okay, I'm happy to do it. And I'm going to, Connie will probably hit the buzzer. So I'll try to keep it to like 30 seconds, but really excellent presentations. The accolades are already coming into the chat. Congrats to all of our speakers and Lilia and Connie for this really exciting format. I was very engaged the whole time. I couldn't wait to hear what was coming next. And I also really love the Ask Me Anything. So I always love that. Everybody gets a chance to kind of jump in. What I think really struck me the most tonight was, besides this, just such this excitement about the intellectual areas that we're tapping into in our faculty, was just the range of data science research applications that we cover tonight. Some of the stuff I was like jotting down, fact versus fake, social media, smart speakers, misinformation, privacy, polarization, content moderation, exploring COVID impact, the manipulation of statistics, confounding variables in data analysis, recommenders, serendipity, discovery, data cleansing, human behavior, data analysis, algorithms and explanations, algorithm auditors. I couldn't even go on. And also we had this range of personal, national, international. On the very personal level, talking about fathering behaviors and self-tracking behaviors, to the business applications that Ganesh was talking about. We all want to know what's going on in that supply chain, don't we? And that work is really important when we're waiting for, today I had a mattress delivery. It's like, is it going to come? Is it stuck in a container somewhere? They're not going to be able to find it. And so what we have here, and then the very large scale, the polarization across the United States. We talked about that. The COVID treatment in the UK, some of these really very large scale kind of projects. So just to sum it all up, I said it's exciting work. There's a growing job market, as we know, and growing research area in LIS. And so lastly, I just want to say how wonderful the speakers were in being so encouraging to everyone and our MI speakers to believe in yourself, to follow your passions and your interests. Take all our data science courses, look into the area of concentration, and really get to know more intimately the data science area and all of our amazing faculty that we have. So that's it for me. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks, Marie. I don't think I have much more to say to add to what you just said. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to the students and audience for joining us this really has been a fun presentation, and hopefully we'll do it again.
Yes, thanks everybody, and good night. We hope to see you soon, and I look forward to reading your reflections. So with that, I bid you guys adieu. Bye, everybody.
Night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.